Hello, everyone. Welcome to another, episode of the Discourse Education Podcast. Actually, I wouldn't really call it an episode. It's really more, once again, another Telegram exclusive where we will, break down some things in further detail, things that I would typically teach in my classes, although of course not that in depth. Because if I were to give everything away, then yeah, I might as well just do this for free. But nevertheless, I hope everything that we break down here will be of use to you and will be of help to you to add value to your academic career, I guess. So yeah. And all right, today what we're going to talk about is this thing called thinking frameworks, right? And primarily it's meant for general paper, and we will be using a GPSA question to demonstrate some things. And of course, I'll attach the essay outline as well so that y'all can peruse it and see the ideation process from there. We are not really going to talk about that, but it's more of the thinking framework side of things. Yeah. So just to set some context first, right? Typically in general paper, what based on my experience, what I've seen is that there is a general underestimation of the subject as a whole, and that is no fault of anybody, right? It's really more of that things are often framed in a much more simplistic manner than it seems. And of course, for you guys, right, just getting into pre-U and then of course going into your A levels here, it can be quite difficult or overwhelming to really delve into the deeper nuances of current affairs and issues in the world. But if you want to do well for your exams, I think it's necessary that you take this step to really go and build your critical thinking skills, really go and build your deeper understanding of all this content, and of course to understand the nuances of all these issues. So yeah, right. So why thinking frameworks are crucial? Because typically when it comes to general paper, what students tend to do is they'll just jump straight in. If let's say we are dealing with an essay question, right? We are not talking about paper 2 today. Let's say we are dealing with an essay question, they would jump right in and then they would think in very binary terms, yes or no. So what do I mean by that? For instance, a very simple essay question can be something like, how far do you agree that let's say sport and business should never mix? So if let's say we have a question like this, right? Typically what students would do is, the very first thing they'll think about is, should they mix or should they not mix? And that in itself is not entirely wrong. It's just that once students do that, they'll get stuck and then they will think, okay, where do I go from here, right? And then immediately you will start ideating in quite superficial terms, okay, like sport and business should never mix because of whatever reason. And then it's a very, very superficial reason, like let's say sport and business should never mix because it can lead to corruption and what have you. Okay, and that in itself is not an invalid point. It certainly is a valid point. And then you can bring out examples of match fixing and all that kind of stuff, right, in the context of a competitive sport. But you would not know how to go further, so then the evaluation would get very weak, very superficial, and your explanations will likewise be just that, this thing happened, therefore sport and business should never mix. And then immediately what students would think about is why they should mix. Then it becomes a very binary analysis, yes, no, 3 bags full, that sort of situation. And you don't get further than that. So thinking frameworks, right? That's where all these things come in, and to really help you, build deeper understanding and deeper explanations. So, I mean, of course, in the first place, what are thinking frameworks? Okay, so what they are essentially is that they are set structures for inquiry. And to put it in even simpler terms, that means you have a systematized way of thinking, right? And there is a sort of like, think of it as something that's coded within you, a preset, I guess, of standard questions that you would ask to find out more about something, right? So essentially what it does is that it helps you organize your thoughts and look at issues from different standpoints. Of course, there are many different thinking frameworks out there, right? And they also differ in terms of their depth, in terms of their complexity, and obviously not all thinking frameworks apply in every context, right? Unless you are talking about a very generalized kind of framework, in which case then fine, go for that. But if you are looking at, let's say, going into a deep dive on issues, right, you can start off somewhere first using a very general thinking framework and then go deeper into it from there. But essentially that's what this is, and the simplest example really that all of y'all should know would be something like 5W1H. So y'all would have learned about this in primary school, and teachers, or even secondary school, and teachers at primary school and secondary school, typically they don't go deeper than telling you this is what it means and then giving you very simple scaffolding or guidelines like, what is this, who is involved, when did it happen, why did it happen, how did it happen, and y'all would use it to break down certain events or to break down certain circumstances or phenomena, right? And again, I just want to point out here that the reason why they'll do that is because ultimately you need to think about it in terms of primary and secondary school. Because if we pitch it at a level that's deeper than that, then it becomes very, very difficult for y'all to go and understand. But now that you're in JC, right, and yes, you're still in pre-U technically, but at this stage, y'all should already possess some levels of critical thinking, right, and a general understanding of certain real-world issues to the extent whereby you would then be ready to go deeper than that when you get into university. So I mean, obviously at the end of the day, university, there's a reason why that is the most advanced level of education, because that's where things really get the most complex. Your professors will no longer hold your hand and they will just tell you, okay, this is how it is, this is a pre-established body of knowledge, go for it, right? Do your own research, look at, do your lit reviews, literature reviews. That means reading through works of others who have already done their own original research and come up with your own conclusions. So for this one, right, typically for the 5W1H, it's a very, very great general thinking framework because it helps you break down basic information. So what I mean by basic information is that if, let's say, you come across something that you totally don't know or have never really heard of, right? So for instance, the other day when I was teaching my students, why am I blanking out on that topic? I was teaching them, gender issues, and they gave me this example of this very young K-pop pop star. I can't remember her name now. Is basically a very young, I think 19-year-old K-pop star. And they was using her as an example for, the objectification of women in the media and how that can lead to certain, I guess, undesirable social consequences. Because from what I remember, they were telling me, oh, that girl, very young, she's very young, and she's an idol for many teenagers, obviously, and also, sort of like an inspiration for them in the sense that they would aspire to be like her. So, I mean, that's great and all, but end up what happened is that there were also cases of teenagers, developing eating disorders because of their own body dysmorphia and their own desire to look like this young K-pop star, essentially. So when they told me about this girl, I was like, who is that? Because I'm an old man, number one. Number two, I'm not into K-pop. So the only people that I know from K-pop are BTS. Other than that, I really don't know already. And even there, I don't listen to their music also. So when it comes to my connection with the Korean culture, or at least Korean pop culture or Hallyu, I know next to nothing. So when my students tell me that, then I was like, oh, okay, who is that? What is the issue? When did she come into prominence, right? And how and why? Or she's a great singer, a dancer, whatever. And then afterwards, they talk about the body dysmorphia, not body dysmorphia, sorry, the eating disorder issues. And then that's when I started asking myself in my head, okay, why did this happen? And then I would immediately break it down for them. Oh, you see, so media portrayal, blah, 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 right? And the objectification of women in the media and how that can curtail gender equality. So this is a great framework to clarify all this basic information, but we need to go deeper than that. So later on, I would talk about some examples of some of these questions or set definitions that I have for certain institutions or stakeholders in society. I'm not going to go into the full thing, obviously, because if you want to find out more about that, sign up for a free trial. I'll be happy to go through that. And then if you want to find out more about how to apply it in your essays in very granular detail, then please feel free to join us for our lessons. But for now, once again, the thinking frameworks are essentially this, right? Structured ways of asking questions, structured ways of organizing your thoughts, and assessment of real world issues. And why should we have such frameworks in place? Reason number one is great for understanding content. So, for instance, right, all the videos that I've been producing so far, for the TDEP, the Discourse Education Podcast, the latest episode is up already. Please go and watch that. It's on the tuition industry in Singapore. The thing is that aside from answering the basic question of like, what is this, right? Assuming that you already know some of it, let's say we know some of what happened with the former minister, Mr. Iswaran, right? We know that he was charged for corruption. And then we want to go deeper than that, then we can gather some more information. Okay, so who are involved? Ong Beng Sing, Iswaran. What was it? Oh, we already answered that. When did it occur? Past couple of years. Like over the course of past couple of years. Where? All over the place. But if we are talking about specific context, then we are talking about the contexts of corruption, alleged corruption over certain contracts related to things like, let's say, the F1 Grand Prix in Singapore, right? And then why and how did it happen? And I mean, of course, the full information has yet to be disclosed, but from this case, and of course the trial is still ongoing, we can already start to understand, or at the very least surmise and analyze why and how, right? But those are the two hardest questions to answer. So if we have a set framework, let's say, and this is the one that I typically teach my students, how would governments typically behave versus what if they may be caught up in certain interactions with other stakeholders, right? So what are they guided by versus like what are they guided by in reality versus what they should be guided by in reality? Then if let's say the government is behaving in such a way whereby they are guided by how they should behave, then things would run as per usual, things would work as intended. But if they are guided by something else, then you see a dissonance already, right? And that dissonance is what provides you with the analysis, the meat, I guess, the for you to flesh out, this particular example. Okay, so government is supposed to behave in this way, but then Mr. Iswaran alleged corruption, right? Then how did this happen? Then you start to see the links that, the government, in this case, Mr. Iswaran, and the relationship with Mr. Ong Beng Seng, that sort of things. And from there, we can tease out further, economic, cultural, so on and so forth. So, the idea essentially is to be able to bring in different perspectives, right? So we use certain lenses with set definitions, like what I said earlier, how governments should behave, how businesses behave, how the media behaves, how technology can have an impact on society, so on and so forth. And we apply all these different perspectives, we get different answers. That's how we flesh out the nuances, and from there we can draw connections between the information that can be gleaned from all these things. I mean, obviously not every single lens would apply. So for instance, when it comes to the alleged corruption case of former Minister Iswaran, if we use the gender lens, then there's not much to tease out there. I mean, unless you talk about like, why is it that people in positions of leadership, are typically men, right? But it doesn't answer the question of how or why such a case at the highest level of government would actually occur. So in which case then I would set that lens aside and then I'll bring in something more pertinent. So yeah, that's how that's reason number one for why thinking frameworks are crucial. Okay. And of course, moving on. Excuse me. Moving on, we have reason number two. And that is that in a practical sense, it helps us better understand question requirements. Because whatever that the question asks you, right, in the context of GPSAs, there are essentially subject matters on which they'll touch and they might raise certain stakeholders like government or individuals, so on and so forth, or businesses, right? I mean, of course, sometimes the questions can be very general, in which case those questions we would have a different technique for that. But if we have certain structures in place to help us think, then we can identify the right questions to ask. So like what I said just now, the main framework that I teach my students really is the behavior of stakeholders and institutions. What is their expected behavior versus the reality of their behaviors in certain case studies or contexts, right? So when we look at these questions, then we can identify, okay, what should I question here? How do we identify the correct inter-stakeholder relationships here? I mean, of course, in the first place, the very first thing you should do is to break down the question requirements. So your question key terms, all that. I think I already have a video up on that, how you should break down question key terms. All right. Please go and look through the links on the Telegram channel. If I'm not wrong, I already posted a video on that. Yeah. Well, it's not a dedicated video, but essentially there were a couple of videos, that were posted last year in 2023, of me breaking down certain essay questions. So you can look at those videos and see how I break down the question key terms. But in this particular case, yeah. So for instance, if let's say we have a question like this, right, and this one is TDE original. Okay, so go radical or forget about it. Right? How far do you agree with this statement in solving environmental problems? So what that means when I say TD original, that means like I set the question myself. Okay, so over here, okay, we can break down certain things like 5W1H, behaviors, stakeholders, right? So when we apply all these thinking frameworks, yeah, so I'll demonstrate further later on. Okay. Now, the third reason is really, for the sake of teasing out nuances and explanations. So as I said earlier, right, when you have a set thinking framework in place to really go and understand, to really go and understand all these different content or examples, so on and so forth, right? Then we can understand the deeper nuances. But why do we need to do that? Because if you understand the deeper nuances, then you can deepen your not examples, explanations accordingly, because you would have a deeper understanding of the content itself. Then you will be able to flesh out the deeper implications. It's as simple as that. So not only that, right, as you flesh out your examples on a deeper level, you can also use, or rather you would possess the knowledge to understand or to be able to better evaluate that particular example. So you would be able to bring in different perspectives, right, to perhaps add further balance to your analysis. Because okay, different schools have different methods for this again, but how I teach my students to write particular body paragraph is PEEL, right? But two examples, two explanations, and then evaluate that particular argument as a whole. So that body paragraph, evaluate it. Then how do you evaluate that body paragraph? That's where the deeper nuances come into play. If you understand the deeper issues, you'll be able to bring in another perspective. Of course, then the next question you might ask is, okay, then when do we turn that evaluation into a separate counter argument? That's a possibility as well. And I would say, well, it's dependent on the question and dependent on how much you want to flesh out your evaluation. If the evaluation is very strong, you want to flesh it out fully as a body paragraph, by all means go right ahead. But if you just want to mention, hey, there are these certain limitations in place or these certain nuances that we need to consider, then that should be good enough, right? And that's what all these frameworks are for. So for instance, right, we have this case study of Bristol Bay. Again, I've already made a video on this. I would like to encourage you to go and watch it first. So in that case study of the Bristol Bay, we broke down like, hey, this is one of the world's final, or at the moment the largest wild salmon run in the world. And if we have thinking frameworks in place, right, we can understand, hey, we hear all these analysis about how environmental sustainability is important, how things like that, like the establishment or the at least the attempted establishment of the pebble mine can occur. What is the government's job as a whole, and how should the government react in this? Oh shit! Oh no! Yeah, sorry about that. I accidentally spilled some coffee, so I had to clean it up. But yeah, as I was saying, right, what is the government's job in general? To in situations like this, how should they react? How should they behave? Or at least in accordance to what they should do, right, versus what may prevent them from doing such a thing. So in that video, I did talk about how the whole court battles over the Pebble Mine's establishment in Bristol Bay was delayed for a couple of decades. That has a lot to do with the governance process itself also. And if we take that sort of mindset, right, that thinking framework, and we apply it in this case, then we will know, okay, government should behave in this way, but why did it not behave in that way? Then we can tease out, okay, then what is the relationship between governance itself, protection of the environment, as well as other business interests. So yeah, those are the three reasons why thinking frameworks are so crucial. Okay, and now we'll see how that comes into play in an essay outline. So for instance, again, you have this question here, go radical or forget about it. How far do you agree with this statement in solving environmental problems? So in this particular case, what we are looking at essentially is a couple of things, right? So the question breakdown here first, go radical or forget about it. That means take drastic measures or it will not work. And how far do you agree? That is just the extent to which you agree with this statement in solving environmental problems, right? So when we look at, and again, I'm just applying the framework here. When we look at environmental problems, the set definition that I have for my students is this. When it comes to all these environmental issues, right, they are considered transnational issues. That means issues that transcend national boundaries. Okay. No, transnational is not a portmanteau of transcend national. No. But yeah, these are transnational issues that threaten mankind's existence. So why do I say that environmental problems threaten mankind's existence? Because if you know all the possible implications of anthropogenic climate change, right, and overexploitation of natural resources, so on and so forth, what sort of impacts can it have on the ecosystems and ultimately us as a species, right? Then that's where you would know that, hey, if global temperatures increase by, let's say, even 2 degrees Celsius above, pre-industrial averages, then you would have crop yields dropping like crazy. You would see coral bleaching, which is already happening. And when coral bleaching occurs, your different microorganisms that feed on all the coral bed stuff and all that, they would die off, and then consequently you have this massive chain reaction on the entire food web as a whole, right? So your apex predators at the top of the food chain in the oceans, for instance, like sharks, they would die off as well. And then consequently for us, we rely on the ocean for much of our sustenance as well, right? And in some nations, that even has a cultural implication to it. So that's what happens, right? So if crop yields decrease and your ocean life dies out, then we'll just die also lah, because there's no food around, right? So that's just for climate change. Obviously, I still haven't talked about things like ice caps melting and displacement of human settlements, the rise of waterborne diseases, right? More unpredictable and severe natural disasters and climate disasters, so on and so forth. And so, when these things occur, our very existence becomes threatened, right? And so when I apply that particular thinking framework there, okay, so environmental problems threaten mankind's existence, what that means is that we need to go radical. We need to go radical to protect the environment, you know. So when I break down the question requirements here, we need to take drastic measures. That's what the question is suggesting, right? These are the key terms interpretation, you know. And then I would go on to ask myself, okay, go radical in what ways, right? Perhaps raising awareness, implementing change. And then, of course, we can ask ourselves, why or why not? Why should we do this? And based on my understanding of environmental problems, you know, because I have a thinking framework in place already, that when I assess environmental issues, always take this lens. It threatens mankind's existence. Then we already have our first point, which is, yeah, definitely, right? We need to go radical. And then from there, we can identify further reasons for that. So for instance, at mankind's current rate of exploiting natural resources or, you know, energy needs, okay, if we want to conserve the environment, our efforts will be futile, right? If we do not radically change the way that we live. And you can go on to deepen your analysis further by saying that, you know, as you can see here, our way of life at the moment, right, when it comes to consumption as a whole, is unsustainable. And this thing can lead to environmental degradation, which would in turn lead to the threatening of mankind's existence. Then you can flesh out your examples even further. Okay? Now, when it comes to the evaluation, as you can see here, I wrote changes to the system must be enforced, albeit in a gradual way, right? Lest only surface level changes occur. Because if only surface level changes occur, then there is no point. But how did I even ideate this particular evaluation? Because I know that there is another stakeholder here that might not necessarily see the conservation of natural resources or the environment as a whole as a top priority. And that's where we look at things like the people supplying the goods and services, i.e., businesses. And in the framework that I teach my students this. Businesses aim to make as much profit as possible. And that comes at the expense of society as a whole. If that sounds very familiar, it should be if you take econs, because that just means market failure, right? So when businesses prioritize profits above everything else, you know, even the interests of society as a whole, or the benefit of the society as a whole, that creates negative externalities. And in this particular case, the negative externalities would be your environmental issues. So in econs, the thing is that you can stop your analysis at the point where you say, oh, the government can regulate, right? Pass laws and policies to reduce state weight loss and all that. And of course, you might be expected to evaluate further. I'm not really sure when it comes to assessments of things, how econs is testing your, that's why I don't teach that subject. But, you know, we can go on in this particular case to delve deeper as to like why businesses may, you know, be particularly interested in carrying on their business operations or business models. In some cases, certainly some businesses may transition, right? Make it more sustainable because they know that it is in their interest to do so. If society as a whole is shifting away from the days of excessive consumption and decadence in the past. But some businesses might keep it that way, you know, like greenwashing, you know. So for instance, your oil companies, okay, it is definitely not in their interest to ensure that all these changes, fundamental changes in the ways of consumption occur, because it directly threatens their very existence as well. Because if we want to move away from excessive consumption or the consumption of certain goods and services that will create a lot of carbon and release a lot of carbon and increase our carbon output, then the oil or the energy industry as a whole is in deep trouble, because the production and the consumption of oil is what is the main, I guess, culprits of carbon output into the atmosphere. So to shift away from all these things would mean sidelining the oil industry as a whole and looking for more renewable sources of energy or more sustainable sources of energy. And so their existence is threatened. And that's why, to maintain their profits and profitability, they will do whatever it is that they can to ensure that they themselves are not affected, or to hinder it as much as possible. And then of course that's where you can use examples like, hey, a couple of years ago, right, in 2021, it came out that all these oil companies already knew the impacts of the consumption of oil vis-a-vis carbon output. And they found out about it in the 1970s. But they decided to start a misinformation campaign. Why? To protect their profits. Why would they protect their profits at the expense of society? Because some businesses certainly behave in this way. All right? Because business is business. Profits has no place, or the gunning for profits has no place for morality. I mean, obviously nowadays things have certainly changed, but yeah, so that's why I can think of this evaluation, because okay, businesses, if they prioritize profits, that means they will go to any lengths to maintain their profitability. So the changes must be enforced. There must be regulation in place. Okay? And of course, how do I know immediately then that regulations can be a way of doing things? Because the way that I teach my students when it comes to the behavior of the government is that it should be taking care of the long and short-term needs of citizens. So you learn this in econs, right? Or any other forms of humanities. You often learn, even in H2 history. When governments make certain policies, ultimately their aim should be to benefit as much as many people as possible, right? And then of course you learn in SS, sometimes the government has to make trade-offs, because why? Limited resources, opportunity costs incurred, that's inevitable. So if we understand that the government's job is to take care of short and long-term needs of the citizens, when a social issue comes up, like environmental issues that threaten mankind's existence, who should step in? Governments. Governments step in, pass laws and policies, regulate. And then of course from there you can also go deeper, even deeper, right? Let's say you can question the effectiveness of government policies as well, because sometimes they can, or rather not sometimes, often they are influenced by business interests, especially in democratic societies where lobbying, right, political lobbying, if you don't know what that is, please go and look that up. Where political lobbying is not only a norm, it is framed as, a freedom of speech, right? The right to seek redress of certain issues in society by individuals and companies and certain communities. And in case you haven't realized it by now, that country in particular that I'm talking about is USA lah, right? So a lot of companies may lobby Congress, right? The branch of US government that passes laws and regulations, which is our equivalent is the parliament. They will lobby Congress, right? And then they will say, hey, these are the issues that we face. Please pass certain policies that will favor us, this particular lobby. And then whether or not Congress goes ahead with that is dependent, of course, on the makeup of Congress as a whole, because people of certain ideologies, let's say the conservatives, may prioritize big businesses more, right? Without really considering the negative externalities, because bootstrap mentality dictates that, hey, if you face a problem, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, right? So if there are environmental issues caused by big businesses, that's not really the government's problem, things like that. Or they might think there should be less government regulation, businesses should be allowed to do what they want. Versus a more leftist government, they might think, okay, we need to regulate to increase social welfare as much as possible, things like that. So that's why, just now I said, or how governments should behave versus in reality how they behave. So if governments should take care of short and long-term needs, we can evaluate by pointing out that if the governments turn out to be of a certain political ideology, that may hinder ways to go radical in terms of, regulating all these environmental problems, right? Because there'll be a lack of, political willingness as a whole. So, things like that. I mean, there are certainly more stakeholders and institutions that we can go into over here, but I think for this video that should suffice, right? So businesses, how they behave is profit making at the expense of society, creating market failure. If we were to use econs terms, for governments, they take care of short and long-term needs of citizens, but what can hinder them from achieving something better, right? And of course, environmental problems, they threaten mankind's existence. And that in turn justifies us going radical, at least insofar as fundamentally changing the way that we live, the way that we consume, so on and so forth. So, that's why the thinking frameworks are important, because you see, just from the understanding of these three institutions and how they behave, I can immediately ideate 2-3 points straight away. Then the rest is really just filling in the blanks, filling in the details. What examples can I use? How do I evaluate? How do I explain? How do I draw connections of ideas to deepen the analysis as a whole? Because in your new syllabus, under the new rubrics, this is what Cambridge is looking for. So that's why thinking frameworks absolutely crucial. So TLDR, right? If because as a whole, we our attention span in a way is dropping. So if basically the short of it is this. Why thinking frameworks? Because we want to build deeper understanding of content so that we can understand our question requirements also and flesh out deeper explanations and evaluations. And in turn, that leads to results. So if you want results, thinking frameworks are important because yes, you can have certain essay outlines memorized, you can have certain essays and explanations memorized, but that's not what the A levels is about anymore, right? Perhaps that can work for the old syllabus, but even for the old syllabus, I already strongly discourage my students from doing that. Less so for the new syllabus, because if you have seen the how to use CK in SBQ video, you would know that when I fleshed out the H2 history syllabus, right, that principle remains the same for GP also, which is we want to encourage students to think more critically. We want to encourage students to ask more questions to build a deeper understanding of certain issues. And so if you just simply memorize essays without having a deeper understanding of how things work in society and how issues come about and why all these thinking frameworks are important, you wouldn't be able to adapt your responses according to the question requirements. So you want this because let's face it, we are a pragmatic society. We want results, right? But if you want results, you need a deeper understanding of content. You need to understand question requirements and to flesh out deeper explanations and evaluation, because this is what really gets you the results ultimately. Your ability to explain well, right? So that is the language component. Your usage of long and short sentence structures, varied vocabulary and all that. but what's much more important is the clarity of your explanation and your depth and nuance of your explanation as well. And you can't achieve that without this. And to do this, you need this. So that's why thinking frameworks at the end of the day are the most crucial things that you will need to have, not just for GP, but for history as well. So yeah, if you found this useful, please share it with your friends, right? Get them to join our Telegram channel. That's where we put out all this content for free. Of course, if you would like to ask a question, use this link, submit a question, not just for GP, but for history as well. You can ask me any questions about skills, about content, whatever, right? If you are looking for a free tuition trial, okay, please call this number or WhatsApp me. Basically this number, right? And we can see how we can help you, with your academic journey for the A levels. And yeah, this is the link for our Telegram channel in case anyone that isn't already following us here, please join our Telegram channel here. We are trying to build a community, and yeah, so again, if you're looking for further help, please contact us, right? We cover all these things in our lessons, and then of course we get our students to put it into practice and all that. And so yeah, I guess that's it for this Telegram exclusive, and I'll see you guys next time.